Hi everybody, and welcome back to week 2 of CAD 1134. Hopefully everybody was able to complete the assignment for last week. It isn't meant to be stressful by any stretch of the imagination. Like I said, the idea is to simply get you some practice, get used to working with the CAD software, because this week we're going to basically redo what we've done, but use some new tools and start to make our drawings more detailed and more precise. So let's get into it. The first thing that we're going to do though is I'm going to get you to pause the video in a second and do your quiz. The quiz is a way to review what we did last week, so it lets me know how well you're retaining the information. Whether we need to speed up or slow down, and don't get too awfully stressed about it, because these quizzes are not worth a lot of marks, but it is a great way to ensure that people are engaged. All right. So go ahead, pause the videos. We're going to do this quiz. You have up to 15 minutes. Typically it only takes 5 or 10. When you're finished, go ahead, close it up. For in class, this always happens at the beginning of class, and it's a great way for me to deal with attendance. If you're doing it from home, so be it. You can access it at any time, but there is a window of 15 minutes once you start. All right. Make sure that you do save your quiz so that you can get full marks. All right, so this week we're going to talk a little bit more about the command line. We're going to talk about some hotkeys. I want to explain what syntax is. We're going to touch on a coordinate system, circles, and we'll probably do something with donuts. Not that useful, but there it is. Multi-line text or M-text, scaling, mirroring, hatching, rotating, exploding, arrays, insert, offset, block, object snaps, orthometric mode, and layers. So there's a lot of stuff that we're going to actually start playing around with, and the best way I feel is to actually drive around the environment with you, and we'll do an in-class exercise, and then I'll cut you loose to continue working on your schematic. All right. So this next slide here is talking about the coordinate system. Now, a coordinate system, everybody should remember from high school math, that we have an X and a Y plane when we're dealing with 2D. If we had a 3D, then there would be your X, your Y, and your Z axis. But there's also a polar coordinate system, and you can see here that we're looking at plus 45 degrees going anti-clockwise, and negative 45 going clockwise. X positive is to the east, X negative to the west. North would be Y positive, so south Y negative, and Z coming through your page is positive, and going into your page would be negative. And with all polar coordinate systems, you can obviously do multiple rotations. So 720 degrees would just do 2 loops, and you'd be back to your same starting location, but twice. So yeah, if you don't want to go negative 5 degrees, you can go negative 355 degrees. Sorry, positive 355 degrees. Yeah. And it's this should not be news to anybody, but you must definitely be familiar with it and comfortable. All right. So using syntax in the command line. Now, we all remember that the command line is actually that bar across the bottom. It's also when we start to type into AutoCAD. And one of the things that we can do is we can have an incremental move or an absolute move. And the difference being For example, a incremental move would be like me telling you that I want you to move east 3 steps. It doesn't matter what your starting point is, you're going to turn east and take 3 steps. As opposed to me saying that I want you to move from the southwest corner of your room to the northeast corner of your room. These are absolute locations. So you're going to move from here to there as opposed to randomly moving. And they're both useful and necessary in CAD, but sometimes it doesn't really matter where you're starting from. I know that I want a box that's 1 unit by 1 unit. I can simply do an incremental move from my starting point, x plus 1, next move y plus 1, next move x minus 1, next move x minus 1, y minus 1, and that will make a complete box. And how we make these incremental moves is using the @ symbol. Okay, and we'll actually do that in our exercise. But the other one is an angle command. So maybe I don't want to do the trigonometry. I just know that I want to move 1 unit in the x and 1 unit in the y so that I have a 45-degree angle. I can use the less than symbol, so angle 45 at 1, right? And so that will actually move me along the hypotenuse 1, not 1 and 1. Some advantages, some disadvantages. If you wanted to use the hypotenuse, that's great. It saves you having to do, I want to move over the x positive 0.707 and then move in the y positive 0.707, which would give me a hypotenuse of 1. Okay. Okay, so here we are. I'm following through on the written instructions, and so we're going to start by taking our week 1 drawing, and you're going to want to say File, Save As, and we're going to call it your initials. So my initials are SLC dash week 2 dash D1. Okay, for week 2, drawing 1. And I'm just putting mine on the desktop, but you should have it somewhere that you're going to be able to find it. And on this topic, if you're at school, the one thing to be aware of is you cannot save anything to those computers. If you do, when it's reset, so turned off and back on, it completely wipes everything on the hard drive that you may have put there. This prevents us from getting viruses, but it means that you cannot save anywhere on your work computer. It's recommended to save to the OneDrive. It's definitely safer, but probably more convenient to also have a thumb drive. So you do have a OneDrive account available to you. So please take advantage of it. All right. So the other thing that it says here in the instructions is to make sure that you do save every 15 minutes or so, because if it hasn't crashed on you yet, know that it could crash. Okay, so I'm going to skip through a few of these initial steps so that we can get into the meat of it. The first thing that I want to talk to you about is using the multi-line text, and there's a couple ways that you can do it. here. MT should get you multi-line text. You can also, you have the drop-down menu, and there's single line and multi-line text. And we'll not worry about single line for just right now, but here's a multi-line text. I'll make a little text box, and I will call this my drawing, and I'll click off somewhere. Note that this is actually an entity. This is a piece of geometry. It has certain properties involved with it, but you can't yet do a lot with it other than to edit it. Notice when I do double click on it, it opens up the text editor ribbon. So there's certain things you can do and certain things are more difficult. If you wanted, for example, to change the size, what you would have to do is highlight the whole thing, change the size here. Okay. Bigger. Okay. And there is a text window that is created. So this should seem very familiar if you're used to Windows. All right, so that is our text. Now you'll notice that there are a few layers now available to us. So there's layer 0, which you should be working in, as well as model and def points. In order to make sure that you're in the right layer, if you just do the little pull down here and select something, for example, model, anything you draw will now be in model layer. Okay, you were here, draw the same circle, and you'll notice that they look different. Part of the reason why they look different has to do with the layer properties. And in this case, you can see that the model does have some differences between model and layer 0. For example, the line weight, hard to see here, so line weight in this case for model is set to 0.4 millimeter, whereas the line weight for layer 0 is set to default, which is basically 0. Basically, it is false to 0 thickness. Does that mean it won't draw? No, it just means that there's no weight. Okay, so we'll highlight everything that. So I'm going to continue to work in layer 0, and I'm going to skip down here a little bit to our actual drawing that we want to make. And what we're going to attempt to do is to make this into a window. So we can do certain things with it that will make it more pretty. Sure. One would be to add an arch to the top. So I'm going to draw a circle. I'll draw a circle here, and you'll notice that my grid snap is on and can't really find the center of this. So there's a couple things we could do. We could turn that snap off, and we could guess where it is. We could turn our snap back on and create our circle, but use 2 points. So in this case, we have a start point, end point, and that seems to work. And you know what? That's sufficient. The other way would be to actually find the center of this, and there's a couple ways that we could do it. One would be to change our snap settings. The other would be to snaps, but we're just going to stick with the grid snap for. Okay, so this looks kind of silly. Let's trim it up. So trim. We want to, again, choose the trimming item. So what are we going to use for our cookie cutter? We're going to use the outside box. When we're finished selecting the items that we're going to use to cut, press enter, and we'll choose the items that we want to remove. In this case, this one. All right, and so that looks reasonable. Now we've got this nice hatch pattern on here. let's say we want to draw some lines that run off on an angle here. And so we simply draw a line, and again we're faced with this problem. How do we find the center of this? So last time we were able to pick the start and the end. But this time we've got a bit of a problem. How do we find the center of this circle or the midpoint of this line? And the way to do that is to actually use the snaps down here. But I don't want to get into using them all the time, so there's a hotkey. The hotkey is Shift and right click, and it opens up this menu. And in here, you can choose where you want to select your line, your nodes. In this case, we can pick center of that circle. Okay? And we could try to figure out how to make this go. We want approximately 30 degrees, and well, we can get close, but we can't quite make 30 degrees. So if you recall from last week or earlier, we talked about using syntax. So in this case, I can actually use the angle symbol, which is less than, and 30, give us an angle of 30 degrees. And you can see I can pull this out however I wish, and I still have 30 degrees. And I'll just select here. We'll call that good enough. So now we can do a couple things. We can trim it if we wanted, or we could say that we want a couple more lines around here. And so I'm going to show you a couple ways to do this. One of them is to copy the original object, and we'll choose a start and an end point that are the same. Okay. And it looks like there's only one object, but I assure you there are actually two. Okay. But what we want to do is we want to now use the rotate command also here. And we're going to select, we're not going to window this, we're just going to select one object, and we'll press enter. And we'll choose, in this case, the endpoint. Turn off my snap here. Good snap. And you can see that we're able to manually rotate this around, or it's asking for an angle. We were at 30, we want to go to 45, so we need 15 degrees. That's easy enough, right? We can do the same again. Okay, so now we're at 45 and we want 60 degrees. So we could again copy this onto itself. Endpoint, and rotate it here, and we'll rotate it another 15 degrees. So 45, 30, 45, 60. The next one that we would want would be 90 degrees. Well, I don't need to rotate this around. 90 degrees from here will be straight up. So let's create a line from the endpoint, and we want it to go straight up. So we could use the grid snap, which wouldn't work out very well, or we could turn on, remember, the ortho mode. So we'll turn that on, and we can go straight up. All right. So looks kind of silly. I don't like this one. So let's get rid of this one. Matter of preference right now, but I think it looks silly and I don't want to draw two more lines. So we will E for erase, also this button here. Select that 45 degrees, and when we're finished selecting our items, press enter. All right, so that gets rid of that one, and now we could trim this up. Okay, so again, we'll choose the item that we want, and then excess items. Easy enough, and we could repeat this. We could repeat this whole process on the other side, but I am far too pragmatic to do that. I'd much rather do a bit of a shortcut if I can. And so the next tool that I want to show you is the mirror button. And so the mirror button asks us to select the objects that we want to mirror. In this case, we're only going to select the lines at 30 and 60 degrees. Okay, then press enter when we're finished selecting them, and it asks for the first mirror point. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a line. Okay, and you can see it's because of my ortho's already on, it wants to snap around. And that's perfect. We'll just go up here and pick a random point, and it asks us, do we want to erase the source objects? And we don't. And so this way we're able to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, but we only really had to draw 3. The reason why we didn't want to select this original line is it would mirror it as well. And one thing that you don't want are lines that are coincident on top of each other in AutoCAD, because when you erase or trim them, they'll remain and it starts to get things cluttered. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to want to do is to create a frame around this window. And the way to do that is to use the offset key here. Okay, and the hotkey for it is O. And in this case, we want to offset about 1/8 of one of these units, so 0.125. And when we go to offset, the first thing that it wants to do is for you to select the object that you want to offset. And then it's going to ask you which direction do you want to offset it, outside in this case, or inside. Today we want to offset to the outside. Now, when we offset again, you'll notice that the highlighted dimension is the last dimension that we used. And you don't need to type it in again, you can just simply press enter. And this time, because we used a rectangle to make our box last time, if we offset it, it creates this piece that comes up. The upside is that it also closes the box off, but it's a bit of a pain. So we're just going to undo that. And instead, I'm going to show you the next command, and that is the explode command. Okay, explode. The hotkey is X. We'll choose the object that we want to explode, or objects, and then press enter. We now have 4 separate items in this case. Okay. Now there's objects you can explode, there's objects you can't. Obviously, circle is already a base, you can't explode that. Cannot explode a line. Okay. So now we can do our offset again, 0.125, and we'll offset our 4 objects. So far, so good, right? How do we close these off? Well, I could grab them and try to extend them. I could use the extend command, or I can simply use the fillet command. Now, the fillet command, you'll notice down here, has a series of commands available. Okay, polyline, radius, trim, etc. One thing that you want to do when you're using the fillet command to simply close up some lines is make sure that the radius is set to 0. Okay, because a radius of 0 is simply a closed box. Okay, press enter to repeat our last command and close that off. And instant presto, we have ourselves a beautiful window, nice little Venetian thing across the top, lattice work, would fit in beautifully in some home in Europe, I imagine. All right, go back in, we'll adjust our drawing. Okay, we can rename this to, calling it SLC-Week2-D1. Okay. SLC being your initials, okay, the first letter of your name or names, okay, and good enough. As far as the sheet and the drawing, you can leave the scale and what have you alone. Not too awfully worried about it. Yeah, so that pretty much takes care of our in-class portion, with the exception of importing some drawing stuff. Go back here and let's talk about something that you're going to need for your homework assignment, and that's how to import a block. So what is a block? Block is a piece of geometry that is saved as an AutoCAD drawing that you're able to import into your workspace. And in this case, we're going to go and find a piece of geometry for a transformer, because we need a transformer, and this isn't something that we want to draw over and over again, because we're electromechanical or electronics field. It's going to be useful to us to have one. So let's go to the insert tab, and we're going to insert a block. Okay, and already available to us in our starter file here is something called WCT XFMR. So we'll select it and place it here. It's a pretty big transformer. I mean, I'd like to set it on the window cell, but it's clearly too large. So, how to make it smaller? There's a couple ways. The best way, once it's imported, is to actually scale it. And the button is right here, the hotkey E. And when we scale things, the first thing that we want to do is read what it's asking for, which is select the object or objects. In this case, we want to select the entire transformer. We'll press enter, and it's asking us for a base point. In this case, I'll pick some random point. And you'll notice that we can actually just twiddle around and move it how we wish. In this case, I'm going to scale it to 0.5. And you can see that it's now half the size that it was. If it's not sufficient, we can scale it again. And in this case, we'll scale it to 1/8 of its original size. So now it's down, it's a little bit smaller, it's reasonable, we can handle dealing with it. Now the next thing is that we probably want to modify this in some way. Perhaps we want to rotate it. Select and rotate. We can mirror it if that's required. Mirror it, and yes, did it this time. Perhaps we want to do something else to it, like make it into a coil, just an inductor. So right now, this is a block, and we know it's a block because if I hover over it, it actually comes up and says that this is a block reference, and that it's on layer 0, and color is white by layer. And so one of the things that we can do is explode it. If I explode it, I hover over it, now I no longer have a block, I have single lines. So for example, if I wanted to change the windings on this, oh, here. And I now have a different type of transformer. Perhaps I want to turn it into an inductor. now I have an inductor. That simple. And so we've looked at how to import a block. Perhaps this inductor is finished and I want to keep it, that I can place an inductor again. You can go back to your create block feature, and in this case we'll call it an inductor. We select the objects, pick an insertion point, and the rest we'll call good enough. Say OK. And now when we go to insert, we have an inductor and a transformer. And these blocks will live with your drawing, that you can import them over and again. All right. Why don't we next take a look at some other features for creating some geometry? For example, if I wanted to create a circle, we talked about using 2-point. Last week we talked about center and radius. There's another one here that I find very useful, and that is 3 points. In this case, when we pick 3 points, and we can simply select that we want those 3 points to be on a tangent, tangent, a tangent. And it will create a perfect circle to touch all 3 of them. You'll notice that there is actually a circle entity in here called tan, 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 which will basically do the same thing. Tangent, tangent, tangent. Become comfortable with using these different types of circles to start creating more precise drawings. The next thing that I want to show you is something called hatching. Little buttons here, and there are there's definitely some advantages and disadvantages to picking different ways to create your hatching. But in this case, we're going to keep things simple. We're going to create a solid hatch and maybe come inside circles created. And we'll call that good enough. I'll press enter when I'm finished. And one of the reasons why I want to show you this is that you'll notice that this hatch is an entity. If I double click on it, it opens up my hatch menu. As long as I don't explode it or burst it, it becomes a thing. For example, I can change it to ANSI 32 and change the scale on it to 0.25, and I end up with a hatch. We could have used that tool to create the hatch in here if we wanted to take the time, but that kind of defeated the purpose of what we're set out to do. All right, so now we're going to dig into the lab. The lab, we're going to use our object snaps and our mirrors, and probably play around with some line weight and what have you. But what I want you to do is go through the written instructions step by step, and using last week's lab assignment, clean it up, finish it off, and make it perfect, okay? And so the first thing to do, again, is to save your drawing as your initials, week 2. Drawing, in this case, would be drawing 2, I believe, because we did drawing 1 at our exercise. And you can say completed schematic. Want to definitely save so that you can go back if you make a mistake and dig into it. Now, last week you had a partial power plug. That's what this was. This will allow your device to plug into 120 volts AC. And so what you're going to have to do is to create some circles. And I'm not going to spoon feed you. I want you to follow the instructions here to do best. Next, you're going to go in and trim it up so that you end up with a common plug symbol. Next thing is to come down and scale it. Then we're going to place it in the correct location. Going to make a switch, a fuse, and a capacitor, and start to build this circuit up so that it's all finished. Now, using the object snaps, that's great. Make sure that I'm looking for lines that actually come to an end, so we don't have little tails sticking out or gaps. I'm looking for lines that are vertical, horizontal. I'm looking for a resistor that actually looks like a resistor symbol, and going to start to make this drawing actually function. The transistor symbol here, again, I'm going to be a little bit picky because I'm looking for that you to follow the instructions step by step and create exactly what we've laid out here. Adding the arrow is definitely important. Turning on the object snap again will make it jump to those endpoints, so you don't have to go in and right click, control right click every time. You can turn on and off your line weight, something that we didn't really mention earlier, but you can actually hide it or show it. Personally, I don't get too awfully excited about it. So this is where you're driving to. You actually want to create this. And we can talk a little bit about it later, how the circuit actually works. But just for your reference, it is probably the cheapest power supply you could ever build. Why would I want a power supply? Well, it'll allow me to create a voltage at home that I can experiment. So we've got a little bit more trimming, potentiometer. It's all reasonably straightforward. Creating a diode. Again, these items you're going to want to place over and over again. So when you finish your diode, do yourself a favor, turn it into a block, call it diode or something, and then place it over and over again so that you have trouble bringing in a transformer. So again, we want to modify the transformer. You can start with the blank one, but I am looking for you to explode it and modify and trim it up. All right. Text, put on text. And when we're finished, you're going to go ahead and submit this final drawing. And I would like it as a PDF, and please also include WG file, but I need that PDF for full marks. Okay. Now, if you're wondering how the marks are going to be distributed, take a look. There is an Excel file available. That's my marking rubric. Take a look at it. Make sure that you're getting all the marks that you want. Surprised how many times students skip over something easy enough and lose out on the marks. One thing that is almost always missed is this last section, so I'm actually going to mention it this year, and that's to include an LED, right? To obtain a full perfect score in your lab, submitted drawing will appear similar to the one below. It should also include L1, right? There's L1, so I'm looking for you to place in the diode, which you can find up here in the actual schematic. Ta-da! L1. Not sure why they decided to use L1 for diode. Talk about that. All right. Again, thank you for your attention. Please go ahead and send me an email if you have any questions or comments. I do want to hear from you. I hope that you're able to work through this. It's not an easy assignment, but it is important for you to go through it step by step and create a drawing that is clean and neat. If you have to delete what you did last week, feel free. My my first projects I started many times uh, because I would learn something new and end up starting again, opposed to trying to fix it. Don't be afraid of binning what you have in light of some. All right. Thanks, and see you again soon.